Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. What we're going to jump into today may be a multi part um, series about AI. I know, right? Not like everybody else and all of us haven't been using it and talking about it and everything for a while. I find it kind of interesting back in 2020 how you started to see the very fingertips, the thumbnail thin elements of AI start to become more and more prevalent, and the momentum, how the last few years it has just picked up pace. It's actually quite phenomenal. There's ChatGPT and Grok and all these other things that are out there for the AI. And, of course, it can help with so much doing research, looking up information, so many interesting things. And obviously, people can use it as a shortcut, right? Which isn't good necessarily, especially if it's education. We're talking about things like that where people need to learn things, right? We can't just have the computer do all the work for us, right? At a certain point, we have to develop skills ourselves. And I think that's definitely where a line needs to be drawn. But some of the things we'll talk about with AI, we can talk about the ethics a little bit. There is the ethics, and I'll use science fiction because really, what do we have to base any of this on except to look at science fiction of, say, the past decades, right? And how it approached AI. Oftentimes, you would see that these AI, say robots or whatever it happened to be, they're always infused with some sort of ethics program, right? These are the protocols that these items they must not do. They can't hurt humans and all these ethical parameters that kept them from being dangerous and harmful. And usually, the reason why the AI was even associated with a storyline in sci-fi is because the AI or robots in this case, right, went off the rails, right? Somehow they either figured out a way around it or somebody subverted it. Either way, then it became an unknown quantity, right? Dangerous, essentially. Terminator, the whole series of Terminator is based on this, right? So, so you can see how all of that has been broached in, say, sci-fi. Well, reel us up to now, and you see where we're starting to find avenues where, oh, okay, this could be useful. It's obviously useful in manufacturing robotics and things like that. But we were primarily dealing with robot arms and structures that were bolted to the floor, right? We didn't really have to deal with, say, a robot walking around. So, what's the protocol that a robot doesn't have the capacity to do certain things beyond human limits, right? You wouldn't want a robot, for example, to be 5 times stronger than humans, right? Perhaps a robot, whereas an exoskeleton, like a human could do to lift higher weights, right? Say uh, in an environment, say heavy equipment and that sort of thing, or you might employ it for firefighting, right? It doesn't require oxygen. There's a lot of interesting things where you could use robots to go do some of these interesting things, putting out fires in the middle of the forest, all of the things, right? If it was able to carry heavier weights and so on, right? But then do you counter that with less advanced reasoning so that it can do certain things but not go too far, right? So there's obviously these are ethical questions and these should be sit around the round table. And what you don't hear much about as it relates to ethics is where the government is at all reining any of this in. So it makes me think, well, it must be open season to do and develop what you will. And I'm absolutely about innovation and creativity, but are we checking off the appropriate ethics boxes as it relates to, say, again, I come back to it. It's like, hey, if it's in the box talking to us, that's one thing. But if it's running around, that's a whole nother, right? That's a whole nother thing that should require some parameters, right? Because obviously, if we're using it for research and advanced reasoning and that sort of thing, who cares if it's in your computer talking to you, right? Now, all that being said, if it gets into other servers for power grids and water and all these things, and it decides it's having a bad day, right? It's throwing a temper tantrum. Well, there you go. This is what the result could be if you don't put some ethics limitations on it as you develop it. Now, where does that ethics limitation come from? Does that part of the programming and the developers side of the house? Probably where it should start, right? It should be physically incapable of doing something that would absolutely do any harm to any human or animal or natural resource, right? That wasn't designed to do, right? So these are the kinds of questions and the kind of conversations we should be having. And I broached some of this in one of the chapters in my book, A Journey to Transform Culture, and to talk exactly about this, the ethics of it, because we know that the AI is clearly, it's basically just think of your computer. Your computer can compute faster than we can. We just gave the AI the ability to reason back and forth with us. Really, we just gave it that option. It, I'm sure the computer could, if it had the opportunity to Google on its own, it could have done all of this. But the interactivity now makes it a useful tool, and gives us the ability to accomplish more work, which that's part of it's fantastic, right? To be able to simplify and make work more easy and those sorts of things are fantastic. But we also, remember, we can't forget the ethics questions, right? Because we have to protect people, right? We have to protect everyone involved in the situation, keep it, balanced, keep balanced footing as we go forward to make more and more. So today I'm just talking a little bit about the ethics and just touching on a few things. I do think that there are opportunities for emergency situations where it would be more harmful to human beings to subject themselves. I talked a little bit about firefighting. Maybe it's EMT, right? Maybe you have like a medical robot, in your manufacturing plant, for example, just hypothetically, that they can come out and they can do all the things necessary to resuscitate someone, do certain things, administer things that is programmed to do so, right? In those emergency situations, obviously that would also require some sign-offs, so the people say, hey, do you elect to or not to? And some may say no, and some may say yes, whatever. But these are the kinds of things that we could have that could help us, right? You think about emergency response to people in the community. How long does it take for an ambulance or emergency crews to get somewhere when somebody's having life-threatening situations? Well, heck, if you had stations, some of these things stationed around cities and different parts of community, to where hey, the call goes in, these little stinkers could just, maybe they have wheels for legs, I don't know, whatever. But they go buzzing and they're there, right? They're there in 5 minutes or less, right? Because they can just do that. Or perhaps large buildings, right? Apartment complexes or high rises, for example, where there's multiple people, a lot of different things going on. Maybe they have one in their building, right? It becomes a cost feature and an advantage where more people are living there. And then, of course, in the community at large. These are just some quick ideas I just threw off the top of my head. I didn't even think of these before I started to record this video. So, you set me down for 10 minutes and I'm going to come up with a whole lot of creative ideas. All you got to do is follow me around with a bucket and just start throwing those ideas in it, because I'll fill that stinker up. But those are just some of the situations. Think about roadside service now. You get a flat, right? And you're waiting for a tow truck or this or that, but you've got a family and you need resources. Maybe you're out in the desert somewhere and you need water and this and that. Oh, hey, guess what? Now you got a little mobile unit with a little robot in there, buzzing around. It does emergency roadside stuff, has maybe some supplies, this and that, whatever, right? Could be wintertime type things where people, get caught in a snowstorm and they're off off the road somewhere and they're stuck and all those sorts of things. Hey, you can start to imagine pretty quickly where you could have robots doing some of these things that would require us to mobilize a lot of people and a lot of resources. Where if you had something set up already, then you could have somebody respond to such things pretty quickly. Plus, being able to communicate. It would already have communication, right? So now you're talking about SAT level communication where it can communicate to get backup and support, right? So there's just so many, and those are just a few quick ideas, right? Where you can imagine that the AI, and then of course I'm fusing that into robots now because it seems to be where we're going, um, could help people. And I think if it's on the help side of the house, let's cover all the help squares first. Let's do those things. Let's get those things going because then you're going to start to see where the relevance is there, right? If you've ever seen a good movie, what is it called? Century Man, or I think Bicentennial Man. That's what it is. With Robin Williams played essentially a robot in that. And then over the course of lifetimes or whatever generations, it evolves, and then to the extent that it looks like us and doesn't no longer looks like a metallic robot, right? But then it starts to grow in association, right? And being more of a companion. Now you think about this. Elderly, the biggest thing elderly suffer from is what? Loneliness. So you imagine if the elderly have a companion, not only as a help, because that would be absolute, right? Now you're talking about a nursing type situation, kind of a home health nurse type situation, and a companion, somebody for them to talk to or to have conversation, whatever it is, right? Now, I know that sounds a little sterile, but hey, you can make this robot the way you want it to, right? So, hey, maybe you're into documentaries and this robot knows every documentary ever made. Now you can have a conversation about it. Whatever. I'm just throwing stuff out there. But let's look at all the things where it can help people, right? Where it can do good. And let's apply those things first before we start going off into the weeds, into the crossing lines and getting into categories where it can be dangerous to people, right? That sort of thing. Seems like that there's so many squares to check off potentially on the help side before we even get to any of the other potential. So, all right, folks, I'm going to call this AI number 1. Okay. So we'll do more AIs because I got other things to talk about with AI and how it might relate to our future and some of the things that we've been seeing lately. All right. Just a little dangle there. All right, folks. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember to hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. We find when we do this, not only are we helping to transform culture, right, but we're transforming ourselves. Because AI or not, we still are people who require growth in our lives, and that's very important. Never take that for granted. All right, folks, hit like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, we'll talk to you later.